You're listening to Bark and Wag's 15-Minute Vet Talk. Each week, your host, Polly Requa, interviews veterinarians and individuals in the pet industry from across the nation answering pet questions. Bark and Wag podcast is produced weekly for your enjoyment, and show notes can be found at barkandwag.com under the podcast tab. That's BARKNWAG.com. Please remember to subscribe to Bark and Wag 15-Minute Vet Talk.
Thank you for listening to Bark and Wag 15-Minute Vet Talk. Bark and Wag is dedicated to protecting our dogs through advocacy, education, and supporting like-minded dog lovers by selling custom pet products. Bark and Wag is excited to announce our new partnership with a Colorado hemp farm to produce a line of CBD products for your pets. Bark and Wag has CBD pet tincture available in 300, 750, 1200, and 2400 milligrams. Bark and Wag CBD is pet safe, no THC, it's made in the USA, and is CO2 extracted. Please check out Bark and Wag's website, barkandwag.com. That is BARK, to see our line of CBD and awesome merchandise. We love pooch ideas for podcasts and merchandise, so anytime send an email to Polly at barkandwag.com with your suggestions.
Welcome to Bark and Wag 15-Minute Vet Talk. I'm your host, Polly Requa. Today we're talking to Kersti Moss, co-owner of Dog Training Camp USA out of North Carolina. Welcome, Kersti.
Hey, Polly. Thanks for having me back.
Yes, well, I wanted to have you back for a dog training tip. One of the listeners emailed and wanted to know, how do you really teach your dog not to pull when you're walking your dog?
Ooh, that's a really, really popular, common question. So not pulling on a leash, that I always recommend, which you probably already have your dog now, but if you get your dog when he's or she's a puppy, start then. So, and what I do is start with a really short leash. So your dog has just enough leash to walk beside you and they're not zigzagging all around. They're not at the end of their leash, things like that. So you start short and sweet at your side when they're little, and that builds that habit of sticking by you as they grow older, especially if you're going to have a large breed dog. That's really important to start young. But a lot of people adopt an adult dog, or maybe, you just didn't really work on that until they're older, which is also fine. And you can work on it in different ways. So if you're going to do it with an older dog, what I tell people is start with a regular 6-foot leash. So if you're using a flexi or retractable leash or a bungee leash, those are hard tools to use when you're teaching your dog not to pull, because it gives them a lot of distance. And if you're trying to communicate with them, they don't really connect anything because they've got too much freedom. So those are good tools. Flexis and bungee leashes are good tools to use with your dog after they have those good leash manners. But if you're teaching them, start with a regular 6-foot leash.
Okay.
And then the other thing I recommend to people, so harnesses are very, very popular. But if you put a harness on a dog that hooks onto their back and your dog is already a puller, it's almost like hooking up a husky to a sled and saying mush. So when you hook a dog on a harness on the back, it creates tension. And so when the dog feels that tension, they naturally want to pull harder. And if we pull back on it to tell our dog not to pull, what they're understanding from us through body language is pull, even though we're saying don't pull. It's a miscommunication. Okay. So if you want to stick with the harness, that's totally fine, but make sure that you get one that hooks on the front, on their chest. A lot of harnesses already come with those. There are also Easy Walk harnesses that are made specifically to hook on the front, because that way the dog loses a little bit of momentum and they're not so inclined to pull with that harness on the back, if that makes sense. So those are things to go ahead and interrupt now. Look at what types of tools you're using and switch them off of their back. And then, so once you start your walk and you've got your 6-foot leash on your dog and they're either wearing their collar or their harness that's hooking on the front, shorten up that leash. So you don't want to give them too much length, because that they already know how to pull. So you just want them to have enough leash, to be right beside you. and then start your walk. And then a lot of it has to do with your body language too. So if you're looking down at your dog and talking to them or giving them a lot of attention, your dog just kind of thinks that they're in charge of the walk. So if you're looking down at your dog and the dog is looking ahead, the dog is like, oh, I'm leading the way. So what we want to do is change up and just kind of be confident, relax, and have you look ahead. So if you stop paying attention to your dog so much, a lot of times they just kind of fall in line and will follow your lead. So start kind of with that. And then also, I know I'm giving a lot of things, but for dogs that I'm teaching to walk politely, if they don't pay attention to me and they're still pulling, no matter how short of a leash I have, even if they're right beside me, what I start to do is change direction a lot. So if they're going one way, I'm going to turn and go the other way, and then I'm going to turn again and go a different way. And you might feel kind of silly for a while, but it actually gets your dog to pay attention to you and think, oh, we're going this way now, and oh, we're going that way. And if you just make some turns and change that direction up, they start to pay attention better. So it's going to be some work, especially if you have, an older dog that is used to having their walks one way. It'll be some work, but the more consistent you are with it, the easier it becomes, and they start to pay attention to you a lot better. So it's just kind of being consistent with it.
I actually have heard about changing directions to, kind of get them rethinking.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll have to try that because I do have a little dog that likes to pull.
Yeah.
So
I was going to say there, if you look at YouTube, there are so many different types of training styles. Some people use treats to keep their dog at their side. But in my type of training, I'm not too big on treats. I'm more about building your relationship with your dog and making it about praise and attention and things like that. But if you find a method online that really works for you, there are lots of other ideas for it too.
Okay. And what about, would you recommend the choke collar or, like a prong collar?
Yeah. So I don't want to say one tool for any dog. What I do is look at what works best for your dog. So some dogs do fine on a flat collar. That's just, a regular collar with a buckle. Some do really well with that front hooking harness. Some harnesses, they're called easy walks or freedom harnesses. Some dogs do really well with a gentle leader, which is, it looks like a muzzle, but it's not. It's like a little strap that goes over their snout and around their neck.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's really good for large breed dogs too, that are kind of powerful. It just kind of controls their head. Prong collars are good. I actually use a prong collar on 2 of my dogs. But I think it's just really important to find the right tool that works for you and your dog and that you feel the most comfortable with. Prong collars are also good for large breed dogs, especially if you say you are a smaller person and you have a big dog. The prong is a great safety tool to have, even if, you're fine walking your dog, but suddenly they see a squirrel. It just gives you a little bit more control so you're not dragged down, things like that.
Okay. All right, good. Well, thank you for being on the podcast, and we look forward to having you back.
Me too. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you for listening to Bark and Wag's 15-Minute Vet Talk. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll pass along our web address, www.barkandwag.com, to your friends and other pet owners. Have a pressing question for a veterinarian? Ask your question at barkandwag.com under the podcast tab. This has been a KFR production. Join us next time for another edition of Bark and Wag's 15-Minute Vet Talk.